welcome back, my gentle and of course very modern apes, to another episode of Gutsick Gibbon. I'm Erica, your host. I'm Gutsick Gibbon, and this is a channel where what we do is we look at cool science things like anthropology, biological anthropology specifically, actually, zoology, paleontology, primatology, etc. And we also look at those topics under the lens of popular pseudoscientific ideas like young Earth creationism, mostly just that one. As a content creator, I'm in something of a nonsense arc right now, and this is because my IRL responsibilities are crushing. And so as a result, I've been turning to silly topics on YouTube in order to create my weekly filler content and not be punished by the YouTube algorithm too harshly. And it's been going really well for me. These goofball topics are getting significantly more views than my strictly scientific topics, although they don't quite get to the level of like in-depth debunks. Those ones tend to do quite well indeed. But I've got a lot of good stuff on the back burner. I keep saying that, but that's because I'm working on like 3 projects simultaneously and it's taking me forever. And I'm, again, studying for my comps right now. I'm preparing to go back to Kenya later in this summer, and then the ABAs just happened, and then the semester's ending, and I TA at my university, I teach lab, so it's a lot of stuff. That won't stop me from getting you delicious and hearty content, though. I know I've been kind of repeating this spiel for the past several videos, but that's just in case, new people show up and they're wondering, like, why are you wasting your time going over this topic? That's why. Because I have to. And my simian little heart has been warmed by some of the responses. There's actually been people wondering, asking me when the long-form content will return. And for those of you who may be new, long-form content on this channel is like 2 to 3 hour long videos. So it's really long form. But we've been doing a lot of filler content, hence my nonsense arc, and we've been getting this filler content primarily from Answers in Genesis, the lol cow that just keeps on giving. Unfortunately, when I went to go to their page today, I was greeted with some topics that looked quite tantalizing. Let me show you what I mean. So here we are on the Answers in Genesis landing page for their channel. Answers in Genesis is a young Earth creationist organization. They believe the Earth was created more or less in its present state 6,000 years ago. Noah's Ark was a real event, blah, blah, blah. Hopefully you already know what young Earth creationism is if you're here on this channel, because I spend a lot of time debunking it. And I've been commenting recently on the stellar quality of some of their thumbnails. It's like the clickbait of clickbait. Again, like, I hope they're paying the guy who does these a lot of money. And I was extremely excited because last time we had this little number here, and I'm not going to repeat it because I don't want to get demonetized, but like this one, aliens, is it wrong for Christians to believe in them with like a UFO in the thumbnail? Like, that's tantalizing. That's really interesting. What is it that young Earth creationists do with the concept of UFOs or UAPs or whatever we're currently calling them? And you click on the video and it's actually really boring. I watched most of it, and to spoil the punchline, and they don't elaborate on it in a funny way, like at all, they think that most of them are hoaxes or misidentifications, and the ones that aren't might be demons. But again, they don't really talk about it much. They actually spend most of their time doing the usual Answers in Genesis song and dance, where they talk about like the fall of man, Garden of Eden, things of that nature. So it's not very exciting. The other video they've got on here is on the James Webb Space Telescope, which is really interesting. They say the shocking truth about the James Webb Telescope, and if you hover over it, you can see that our boy Jason Lyle is in this video, so that made it kind of tempting, but it's 54 minutes long, and I have a lot to say about the James Webb Telescope. I'm planning on doing a bite-sized bust about it specifically because I believe Lyle has done some sort of misrepresentation with regard to some of the finds on the James Webb, and he's kind of been holding the line with that despite new discoveries coming to light and new publications. I digress. We'll talk about that more later. So I thought, okay, well, if Answers in Genesis doesn't have anything good, anything fun to look at, why don't we visit our old pal Robert Sepper? So I looked up Robert Sepper. Robert Sepper is like an ancient aliens guy. He's also a race realist. So I thought, oh, maybe we'll get something interesting from him. And we have, was prehistoric man genetically modified? Oof, I really like that as an idea. That's going to have a lot of misinformation in it, a lot of nonsense. But actually, he spends most of the time, like, cribbing from someone else's video and then also reading poetry. So there's actually not very much to bite off of in there. So I thought to myself, well, what about Genesis Apologetics? There's nothing there. There's nothing at the Discovery Institute. So I was like, well, what am I going to do? Am I really going to be forced to go and look at, like, Ken Ham's Twitter? That's so painful, is what it is. I don't like reading Ken Ham's essay-long tweets because, of course, he has the blue check mark, so he just vomits up anything that comes to his mind right there on Twitter. And I guess I slowed down and read one of his tweets once, so now Twitter thinks that's what I want to see, and I can't help myself. So I always end up reading them, and it's like it's not fun bad. It's like eating sawdust. It's dry and it doesn't taste good, and you know you shouldn't be eating it. So I didn't really want to kind of move in that direction for today's sort of filler content for today's episode of Nonsense. But then something very fortuitous happened. A friend of the channel, Joel Duff, who I've plugged many times, but he's awesome, so you should go check out his channel, plug again. He brought something to my attention, and I want to share it with you. There's an internet young earth creationist known as Standing for Truth, or Donny Deals, and I've tangled with Donny many times on this channel. I've tangled with him so many times that I've gone through several cycles of I'm never talking about or to this guy again, and then I end up doing it because, I have a problem. But that's the first step, is recognizing that you have a problem. Anyways, a couple of weeks ago, Donny ended up having this sort of live open show where people could come on and discuss, evolution and creationism with him. And a friend of the channel, a different friend of the channel, Dan of Creationist, hopped on there and they started talking about the chromosome 2 fusion. Donny's been pontificating about the chromosome 2 fusion for quite some time, potentially because I released a bite-sized bust about it, and I think it's well done, and I think that he knows it's well done. In fact, he said so. And so they started arguing about it, and I just couldn't help myself. I ended up jumping in and having a conversation with Donny about the chromosome 2 fusion and fossils. And I posted here on the channel a snippet of the fossil conversation because I thought that was the more interesting of the two. And the human chromosome 2 conversation was also interesting, but I never ended up reposting it here just because it was it was less fun in my opinion, and I didn't really want to crib so much from someone else's channel. But I digress. I guess it kind of spurred something in Donny because he's been talking about the fusion site like ever since. So I guess last night he premiered a different open mic that I didn't know about and was busy that night anyways, couldn't have participated, where he talks about the human chromosome 2 fusion, of which I guess he doesn't think it's a fusion still, despite everything, to some folks who came into the room and chatted with him. And I want to talk about that conversation. I want to talk about some of the things Donny said. But first, I would like to sort of set the stage for you as far as what is the human chromosome 2 fusion if you don't know, why is it important for human evolution, and what does Donny know about it? So we humans are in the great ape family, Hominidae, and of the hominids that are alive today, we're the only ones with only 46 chromosomes. The rest of the apes have 48 chromosomes. So the question for a long time was, what happened? Why do we have one fewer pair than the rest of the apes? And the idea that was put forward was that there was a chromosomal fusion event. Now, when Donny and I had a conversation about this on his show weeks and weeks ago, I kind of showed up and laid out the case, but those arguments are identical to the arguments that I initially made in my most recent human chromosome 2 video, which is a bite-sized bust that I know Donny watched because he told me he did. So here's the clip from that conversation where I'm explaining the support for the human chromosome 2 fusion to Donny live. I want to make a couple of comments. So is it cool if I take a couple seconds or maybe like a minute and do that?
Go ahead.
All right, so here's the case for the fusion site. And I can show this using a myriad of different sources that I have on hand right now, as well as pictures, including stained karyotypes, as well as the portions of the genome that I blasted myself, and pictures that Tompkins has shown that show the telomere to telomere head to head fusion, just as was predicted by Turlow and Grouchy in 1972, which is the actual. I know Donny was asking earlier when was this prediction? I sought it out myself. I actually had to translate. I had to find a translated version of the book because this was initially done in German, I believe it was. So I went, got the translated copy, found the first mention ever in 1972 of a purported fusion site as that is the explanation for the chimpanzee or for the status of the human genome as compared to the chimpanzee genome. Now, here's the important thing. Since then, we've done a lot of work. And since the literature has advanced, not only do we see the cryptic centromere, which I've blasted and seen for myself, and I've also done that with Evograd, but in the time since then, I've actually seen the cryptic centromere for myself, as well as the head-to-head fusion site with TTA CCC, I think, or the telomere calling card forward and backward, the alpha repeats as well for the centromere. Um, they are present. This is unequivocally true. Not only that, but degraded subtelomeric regions are also present, which Tompkins handwaves a lot of this stuff. You mentioned ape satellite DNA. I've dealt with that argument as well. If you want to use satellite DNA as something that differentiates humans and chimps, or argues for their distinctiveness, well, then you're going to have a kind for every ape, because every single ape has its own distinct satellite DNA. Now, we've seen other head-to-head telomeric fusion sites or fusion events as well in equids and in suids. So not only does this head-to-head telomeric fusion exist in the human chromosomes, but it's also present in other families of animals that we've been able to actually clock and karyotype. So we've got other examples. We can explain all this. So we get down to the and I can show all of this when I share my screen if you guys want to see it soon. But the fusion and the functional gene. So Donnie mentioned earlier that Tompkins has responded to Ken Miller about there not being a functional genome or a functional gene on the fusion side. He hasn't, and I know this because I've corresponded with Ken Miller, and I looked at Tompkins' most recent claim and most recent debunking the debunkers, which was, I believe, several years ago. Miller's most recent book was 2 or 3 years ago, where we've heard nothing from Tompkins since then, and it's very in depth literature search that Miller does, and I know this because, again, I corresponded with him. Now, to kind of take this home, here's the critical portion about DDX11L2. That gene that supposedly spans the fusion site, it doesn't span it in every single transcript or in every single sequence of the genome. It's only in some individuals that it spans the fusion site. That's the first portion. The second portion is it's a part of a gene family called the DDX11L gene family. You guys, there's other genes in this family. Every single gene in the DDX11L family is found in telomeres, with the exception of DDX11L2, which in some versions of the sequencing is adjacent to the fusion site, and in others spans it, as Donnie said. So if it's functional and it needs to span the fusion site in order to be functional, one, that should be the case unilaterally, but it isn't. But more importantly, why is a telomere specific gene found in the middle of human chromosome 2? There is no case to be made. One, Tompkins's work is shoddy, and I've doing the work to show it for myself. But two, there's simply no case to be made here. This is why the majority of young Earth creationists these days are moving over to accepting that a fusion happened. It's just hominin specific. That's okay. I don't think it matters to young Earth creationism. I think they can accept that. That's perfectly fine. But as Dan said earlier, this is a wonderfully fulfilled prediction with several sub predictions that were contingent, made by folks who are geneticists and those who accept evolutionary theory all the way back in 1972, and has been sort of wonderfully fulfilled up until now. So to all of that, like, I'm asking you, Donnie, like, make the case for me. Make the case that this isn't a fusion site. That's what I want to hear. Donnie and I corresponded via email after this, and I'm not going to share those emails, but I am going to say that we effectively hashed things out decently well, and then he made an offer to come on my channel and discuss Human Chromosome 2 live. Now, this was some time ago, and I haven't responded to his email. The primary reason for this is that I haven't responded to almost any emails from my Gutsick Gibbon address because I've been absolutely cratered by real life work. I've just been swamped. The end of the semester has been incredibly exhausting. But there is a secondary reason, and it's because I don't know if I want to have him on the channel. It's not so much Donnie himself as it is the fact that he regularly platforms Kent Hovind, who has been going through some recent legal troubles that make me very reluctant to have any kind of, like, tie to him whatsoever. Even if it's just having a conversation on my channel with the guy who, like, regularly gasses him up, validates him, hand waves his various crimes. It just makes me hesitant. And then there's also the thing where, like, Donnie goes back and forth on being absolutely repugnant to people like me and then being, like, super kind and, like, kind of snuggling up to me to have conversations. So, but what do you guys think? Leave your opinion in the comments. Anyways, I digress. So Donny, after that conversation and presumably seeing my human chromosome 2 video, unless he was lying about that, he goes on to have a conversation about the human chromosome 2 fusion, like a couple days ago in a premiere that occurred last night on his channel. But Donny's got a really weird sticking point that we really didn't talk about in depth in our conversation a few weeks earlier. He has a problem with the telomere calling cards. So I'm gonna play a little snippet from my video as to what the calling cards are and what they mean and sort of the implications of them, and then we'll hear what Donny has to say. Chromosomes are structured in an orderly way. They look like X's and contain a centromere at the center of the X with telomeres on the tips of each arm. The centromeres and telomeres are identifiable by repeated sequences only found in such densities at these locations. So then, if two ancient ape chromosomes fuse to create human chromosome 2, then we should find the remains of telomeres in the middle of the chromosome where the fusion occurred, and a second cryptic centromere somewhere else in the chromosome. Okay, so that was 5 months ago, and I basically just lay out what telomeres are, what centromeres are, and what we would expect if there was actually a fusion in the ancestral line of humans, or the ancestral line leading up to humans. What should we actually see? And what you'll notice is that I've got the transcript running on the side, and the word density is highlighted. I Control F'd that bad boy just to be sure, and throughout the whole video it comes up around 13 times, and you'll see why this is important in a moment. But let's look a little later on in the video, because what we do later on, interestingly enough, is I actually address the exact argument that Donny makes in his video from 2 days ago or 3 days ago or whenever it was initially reported or recorded. I actually address that actual argument in this video from 5 months ago. Finally, there is number 5, where creationists argue that we find the telomere and centromere calling cards elsewhere in the genome, so using them as evidence for fusion is faulty reasoning. Our DNA is made of 4 base pairs: adenine, thymine, guanine, and cytosine, and these guys are abbreviated as A's, T's, G's, and C's. Telomeres and centromeres both have respective calling cards, which are sequences of these base pairs that always occur in a specific order at the telomere and centromere sites. Critically, they're not just found there once, but they're found there in high densities. So the calling card sequence is found over and over and over and over again at telomere and centromere locations. The telomere calling card is TTAGGG in forward, and its reverse complement is CCCTAA. The centromere calling card is this thing. We'll just refer to it as an alphoid repeat. The most obvious support for human chromosome 2 is the fact that we find the telomere calling cards in the middle of human chromosome 2 at the purported fusion site. We also find the centromere calling cards twice in human chromosome 2. One for the main centromere, and once more for the cryptic centromere. I realize the audio sounds a little tin canish, but that was before I had my lovely professional foam pads plastered all over my walls. Anyways, so now you understand the background. You know what Donny and I have talked about. You know what Donny has seen. Now let's listen to what he said most recently about this topic, the telomere calling cards in forward and reverse.
And I can pull up Erica's video. And in our debate, you said many times, it's the only place. It's the only place. And then I show you on multiple chromosomes, because Chris Roop and I looked into it. And even Dr. Tompkins was fascinated. He's actually going to put out a paper soon on it, where we have multiple instances of TTAGGG, CCCTAA, the mirror image, on chromosomes that have nothing to do with a fusion.
In such high densities, yes. The human genome and the chimp genome are both billions with a B base pairs long, and the telomere calling card in its simplest form is 6 base pairs long. You are going to find it in its 6 base pair format elsewhere in the genome. This is something that I mentioned in my video. As I've shown you previously, it's about the density. It's always been about the density.
Critically, they're not just found there once, but they're found there in high densities. So the calling card sequence is found over and over and over and over again at telomere and centromere locations.
Why is the density important? Because, you ding-dong, those high densities are what characterize the telomeres themselves, the caps. The telomeres in every chromosome have the calling card in high densities, not just once. You wouldn't make the argument any other way other than if we find high-density repeats at the tips of chromosomes in all the telomeres without exception, then the fusion site should be characterized by high-density repeats in forward and reverse, not one or two. The fusion site should look like a fusion site between two telomeres, complete with their high densities.
You did say, and it's recorded in our debate, that no, it's the only place in the whole genome. Erica said it too, the only place in the entire genome. And I admit it, I said that is a point for the evolution model. The point is, and don't shift the goalpost, we have multiple locations. And I'll pull up just one right now. And one is the chromosome 9. Grayson, you're kind of silent. Talk. Did Erica not say in her video that it's the only place in the entire genome that we find those sequences? Don't shift the goalpost. Don't say, well, it's the number of sequences. That wasn't the challenge. The challenge was to show us one other area in the genome.
Donny, I mean, what are you doing? Do you have the memory of a goldfish?
Critically, they're not just found there once, but they're found there in high densities.
It's in there 13 times, Donny. You couldn't miss it. You couldn't miss it if you watched the video. Did you watch the video?
Did Erica not say in her video that...
Bad Donny deals. Understand the arguments you're railing against before you rail against them.
So the point is, that contradicts the argument from the evolutionist side that says, well, this signature is what we'd expect to find if this were the ancient remnants of a fusion. Then the response typically, like with Erica and then with you, maybe not as loudly and proudly as Erica, is, well, okay, we find these repeats everywhere in the genome, but never in mirror image. It's either TTAGG here or CCCTAA over here. But yet I find you at least 5 or 6 chromosomes that contradicts that argument, and one specific chromosome, chromosome 9, that is quite large, that contradicts that as well. And now you're shifting the goalpost.
Nope, and I just showed video support for that, so no. Absolutely not. It's not shifting the goalpost when, like, the goalposts have remained constant and consistent for at least the past 5 months on my end. But one of the things that's fun about this is that Donny's completely relying on the work that Tompkins is doing, which I hope to show in the next video why that should not be done. But that being said, you can just run this for yourself. And I included in my previous video, thanks to Evograd, who provided the instructions, how you can actually do this. And so for this video, I just went ahead and did it. Okay, my gentle and of course very modern apes, so we are going to run this from Ensembl. We're going to run our blast comparison in Ensembl. So you're going to navigate to this site, the Homo sapiens tools specifically, and what we're going to do is we're going to paste our sequence into this top box. Now, what I wanted to make sure I did was use the most up-to-date appropriate human chromosome 2 fusion site sequence because we're using an up-to-date genome. So as you can see, you can kind of travel back in time and use earlier versions of the human genome if you'd like. So what I did is from Ensembl, I went and I downloaded their most recent human chromosome 2, this one right here, the basic DNA unmasked FASTA file. I unzipped it, I opened it up in Notepad, and I pulled from Notepad about 305 base pairs with the fusion site in the middle, so spanning the fusion site. So I opened that up in its own sort of FASTA file just to be sure that everything was copacetic, and then I copied and pasted it, boom, like that. And what you can see with this little arrow here is that it's like accepted our sequence. If you're pasting it and you don't get this little arrow for whatever reason, Ensembl just doesn't like it. So we are going to utilize the parameters that Evograd set out for me many years ago. We're going to make sure our search tool is BLAST-N. We are going to change our maximum number of hits to report from 100 to 5,000. We're going to leave our scoring options alone, leave e-value, word size, and maximum HSPS per hit alone. But we're going to go down to our filtering and masking options. We're going to unclick filter query sequences using repeat masker. And because of the size of our query, we're going to also unclick filter low complexity regions. And we're going to click run. So it's going to take a minute. It's going to take a little breather. And eventually it's going to spit us out to this page here. And it's going to say we're queued up. That means that the program is getting ready to run because it's a web tool. As you can see, I've done several other jobs here and some trial and error. So hopefully that's not going to spoil for you what we're going to find. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort of save you the waiting, and we're going to zoom forward in time. So, okay, here are our results. When you click view results, it's going to take you to this nice little table that's going to show you all of your results. And I had thousands of hits from our little blast that we just did. So let's investigate. Well, we've got thousands of hits. You might be saying, well, I guess the creationists are right. But when we look at this, right, I've sorted this by identity. There's only one hit with 100% identity. There's only one spot in the entire human genome of the billions of base pairs, billions with a B, where we find the 300 odd base pairs that comprise the fusion site. So the fusion itself, along with the immediately preceding and immediately succeeding sequences. Again, only 300 base pairs. That's not very many. One spot. It's in human chromosome 2. It's at the fusion site. This is the fusion site, right? The fusion site is only found at the fusion site. It's not found anywhere else, which means this is a unique spot in the genome. Now, what's really fascinating is that we have, one, we find it in forward, and then the second biggest match that we had, which is again almost 300 base pairs, is the exact same sequence in reverse, right? So you can kind of tell by orientation here, but again, it's red forward and red in reverse. These are our two biggies, and the only 100% identity is the fusion site itself. Now, what's interesting is that we have all of these other hits that are about half of our search, about half of our query, so like 150, 130, 140-ish base pairs. And over and over again, we find half the query showing up in chromosome after chromosome after chromosome. Odd, right, that we would find half the query popping up all over the genome. Why might that be, and where are they found? Well, if the fusion site is a telomere-telomere fusion, so the telomere of one chromosome fusing with the telomere of another and squishing, right, and touching in the middle, then we should be finding half of this fusion site showing up over and over and over again in the telomeres, like the normal, regular, run-of-the-mill telomeres of all of the other chromosomes. And that's exactly what's going on here. We're finding over and over again, half approximately of our hit is found in the telomeres of other chromosomes over and over and over again. And only one place do we find the full sequence, and it is smack dab in the middle of human chromosome 2. Now, what is a sequence that is the forward and reverse read of telomeres in every other part of the genome that it's found doing in the middle of one chromosome? The chromosome that just so happened to be the predicted fusion chromosome of myosin ape 2A and 2B that forms human chromosome 2. Isn't that such a curious little thing? Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking to yourself, is this not circular reasoning, right? Because what you did, gutsickgibbon, is you pulled the 300 base pair section from human chromosome 2 and then searched it and found that it's found in the fusion site, human chromosome 2. You searched the fusion site and you found the fusion site. Absolutely true. But what we were testing here was whether or not you could find any part of that calling card in any substantial number, and indeed specifically like the core of that 300 base pair sort of sequence unit, anywhere else in the genome. And you can't. And in fact, just to be sure, I narrowed down the search even further. I took it from that 300 base pairs all the way down to just a handful of base pairs that make up the fusion site itself. And as you can see here, we have our query, it's been completed, and we have one hit found. I wonder where it is. Wow, this 24 base pair section is found in one spot, and it is right there in human chromosome 2, right at the fusion site with 100% identity. Isn't that strange? And just so you can see really what we did, let's scroll up and open up the job details so you can see the actual sequence that I searched. It was a sequence that goes AGGG, TTA, GCT, AAA, CCT, AA, CCC, TAA. There's our fusion site. So feel free to run this for yourself. Do the same thing I did, do something different, see what you come up with. Again, this is just a web tool. The comparisons that I'm running for Tompkins's chimp-human similarity are in like the downloadable version of BLAST with significantly more sort of coding involved. This is just doing it online in the browser, just playing around just to see how Donny's work here, his, I guess, recapitulation of Tompkins' work actually pans out. Now, my question is, what the hell was he talking about chromosome 9, about how you can find this, the fusion sites calling card in chromosome 9? Because as we just saw, you can't. You might be able to find, like, the telomere calling cards, you know, in the telomeres of chromosome 9, but the only place that you find the fusion site in forward and reverse, it's in human chromosome 2. Nowhere else, as we just saw. So double check me, Donny. Go, see what you can find. At the end of the day, this feels a lot like Donny just taking Tompkins' word for things instead of running these tests himself, which, again, he has the tools to do this. I know he does, because like I've shown them on my videos and he's gotten them from EvoGrad, so he could go and run this himself, but I guess he hasn't, because I don't know, he's not done it on camera, he's not shown us his results, he seems to just be talking about Tompkins' results and showing pictures of Tompkins' work, and I don't trust Jeffrey Tompkins for reasons that will be revealed in a video very, very soon. But whether I trust Tompkins or not also doesn't seem to matter, because when you run this for yourself, he's just not correct. He's there. You can't find the fusion site elsewhere in the genome. You can't find the telomere calling cards in forward or in reverse in such high densities outside of the telomeres themselves or the fusion site in human chromosome 2. You simply can't. So I don't know where either of them are really getting that information from, what kind of robust analysis they've done to show us that this is the case. But like, Donny, you got busted again, making some goofball mistakes on camera, and like, you know you can't hide from me. You cannot hide from my ever-watching eyes. My spectacles follow your mistakes wherever you go. When you bungle human evolution, I know. I always know, I always find out, and I always come for you, Donny, because I have nothing better to do. It's more reflective of me than it is of you, I suppose. Anyways, standing for truth, Donny was wrong yet again on human chromosome 2. He continues to be wrong on human chromosome 2. Pretty much the only thing that he harps on these days is, I guess, the fact that he thinks there's a functional gene spanning the fusion site, therefore it couldn't be a fusion site. Take away the fact that you can have a fusion occur and then a functional gene migrate onto the site. We know that genes do occasionally move around, but more importantly, it's not a functional gene, not that we know of. It's barely transcribed, and even when it is, it's not transcribed, doesn't span the fusion site in everyone, first of all, but it's not transcribed in a way that is like super distinguishable from noise, and given it doesn't span the fusion site in everyone, I really don't think that this is excellent support for the fusion having not occurred. But as I've said to Donny before, I don't know why they don't just like eat the bullet on this one, because like, you can just say that God made Adam and Eve with 48 chromosomes with the ape condition. Like, narratively it's a little weird, but it doesn't totally collapse the entirety of young earth creationism in and of itself, although it does make for an excellent fulfilled prediction for evolutionary theory. Now, you might be thinking, Gutsick Gibbon, you're going after Donny for standing for truth again? Why? Who cares? Who cares what he's saying? Who cares what he's doing? And you're right. That's why we're going after Tompkins next. And I'm really excited for that video because I've put a lot of work into it. I've contacted a lot of people. I've talked with a lot of folks. I've learned how to do a bunch of cool new things. And I am very excited to share my results with you because I copied Tompkins' methods. And I have thoughts. If you like what I do, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you want to support me in other ways, you can join my Patreon, which, occasionally those guys get early access to videos when I'm on top of video production, but they've been in a bit of a drought. I'm barely finishing these things on time as it is, and sometimes not finishing them on time at all. So I thank you very much for your support. You get your little name at the end here in a second, which is cool, and occasionally other perks when I can offer them. And so, my gentle and, of course, very modern apes, I'll see you really soon in the next one, and I can't wait.